Alright, let's talk about Superthermal in Prey. So Superthermal is an ability that you get from scanning thermal phantoms. What it does is it lets you place a trap or cast it directly on an enemy or any living NPC in the game, and it will explode, dealing damage to everything caught in the trap or in the explosion. This will deal damage to you unless you have an ability, a passive, and I'll go over that in a second. But this can trigger on friendly NPCs and allies, so be very careful when using this. You do not want to use this around friendly NPCs. They can trigger it, they will get damaged, you will get the bad ending. Very likely, because the game doesn't like when you kill the NPCs, so definitely don't do that, unless you want the bad ending. But alright, so this is a pretty good ability. It has a 6-second cooldown, so you can see there in the corner. I did time it. It takes around 6 seconds. It costs 45 Psi. There is an upgrade to your suit. It's a chipset that reduces the cost to 40 Psi. This can be cast on any surface, as you can see here. It cannot be cast in the air. Well, actually it can be, but you have to be like far away. So, oh, looks like we got a nightmare going on our hands. So let's just like make quick work of him with this amazing ability. So he's having a good time being a nightmare. We're just going to hop down here, hit him with some pretty fat damage. So this is survival mode. So I'm just going to like dodge him and then one more cast and he's gone. So you can see that this is quite a strong ability. I just killed a nightmare on accident. Like I just, you know, he triggered 3 traps, took fat damage, and we killed him like nothing. So you can cast it in the air, but you have to be pretty far away in order to do that. But otherwise, it just casts on whatever surface or enemy is nearby. So you can place traps like on walls, for example, and if an enemy walks into the radius of the trap, it will trigger. So it can be used in this way. You cannot trigger the traps manually, so like throwing an object at the trap in the trap's radius, you entering the trap's radius, nothing will trigger it. If you shoot it, shooting it doesn't do anything. Gluing it doesn't do anything. Hitting the glue on the top of the trap with a wrench doesn't do anything. So the only way this triggers is if a living enemy or ally walks through this. So some notes about the damage. This is the highest damage Psi ability. However, it does very low damage. It does like 1/5 of its damage to robots. So if you use this on a robot, it'll deal like 20 to 24 damage. If you use this on an enemy, the rank 3 will deal like 125 damage, which is quite strong. There are 2 chips that can scale the damage. One that scales all Psi abilities in general, and another that specifically scales Superthermal. Tier 1 lets you place 1 trap. Tier 2, 2 traps. Tier 3, 3 traps. The radius and damage scale up to 125 damage for Tier 3 and 5.5 meter AoE for Tier 3. Everything else deals less damage, like the Tier 2 deals less damage and has a smaller radius, and Tier 1 has even smaller radius and does even less damage than Tier 2 and Tier 3. So this ability does cause burn. The burn, regardless of tier used, is always 10 procs, and each proc does 3 damage, so you're looking at 30 damage of Afterburn against organics. Machines and robots do not burn, so they will just take very low damage, so do not use it against them. This does not affect thermal phantoms at all, so definitely don't use it against thermal phantoms. You can negate the self-damage by taking fire resistance. So under energy, thermal resistance. If you have thermal resistance, you will actually take 0 self-damage. So the nightmare in this fight actually like rushed me down, and I didn't take self-damage from the thermal, or the super thermal triggering. So this is extremely useful because what you can do is you can stand in a trap and an enemy will rush you and usually kill itself. If you have 2 or 3, you can stack traps too. So if you have a stack of traps and an enemy rushes you, they're basically dead. They're going to take like 3 times 125 damage. And you saw there is a way to manually detonate traps, and that is to cast beyond your limit. So if you have tier 1 and you cast a second trap, it will detonate the first one. However, manually detonating traps isn't really useful. You're better off just waiting for an enemy to run through it if it's already on its way to you. And obviously stacking traps can be extremely powerful for instantly killing annoying enemies or just leading enemies. Like say there's like a telepath, you want to like run away and kite, it will kind of follow you And if you can get it to path through the traps, like if you place them like higher up, you can get it to path through the traps and take like fat damage while avoiding it and hiding, so you can be like passive. So you can be like safe and then damage enemies. So Superthermal is one of the best abilities just because you can damage enemies while being safe. Using it on an enemy does not also trigger aggression, especially if they don't see you. So you can just leave these out and then just like hide, and enemies will just die over time. So you can use this as like a thief. It's quite useful. Not necessarily a thief, more like a sneak build. Aside from that, you will not get Psi if running Thermal Resistance 2 off of self-damage, because you will not take any thermal damage, any fire damage, to gain any Psi from that. I did test this. Overall, this ability is good for setting traps. You saw earlier, I just completely wasted a Nightmare on Nightmare mode with all survival options checked, and I basically just kept avoiding his like attacks and then casting these, and eventually killed him just with this ability, just to kind of showcase it. You can use Psi combos with this. So what a Psi combo is quite simply... Oh, I'm just going to drink some water just to show this. In-game, not in real life. Alright, so what you do, this is a Psi combo. You cast an ability, quickly open your wheel, cast another ability, quickly open your wheel, cast another ability, quickly open your wheel, and you can combine Electrostatic Burst with Superthermal with Kinetic Blast, and then finish an enemy off with Psycho Shock, Lift, Damage, or whatever. So that's an example of like a Psi combo. And it does an insane amount of damage. You can kill most enemies with one use of that. And the best thing about it is you can just, if you have Psi Water, if you did the side quest for Psi Water, you just can use, this is your form of offense now. You can just use this for free. So it's pretty insane. But there's also one more thing I didn't mention in my Electrostatic Burst video. If you have Electrostatic Resistance, you will also take no self-damage from that. You'll still suffer the effect. So like if I have a weapon out, for example, it'll actually force your weapon offline, but you will not take damage anymore. So the resistances are actually a little bit better than you think, because they prevent self-damage from both Electrostatic Burst and Superthermal respectively. And the absorptions aren't nearly as good because you will not proc those off of the self-damage, because, you know, once you take no self-damage, there's no damage for it to proc off of. But at least tier 1 for these is these trees, like these lines, are very viable and very good. So yeah, that's Superthermal. It's actually quite strong. It's especially good against nightmares, telepaths, and pretty much like the more annoying enemies. You do get 30 damage of burn on any organic enemy except for thermal phantoms that you hit with this. So you can use hit and run tactics with this quite effectively. Its cooldown is only 6 seconds. And once you're like placed, if you get like 3 of these out or 2 of these out, and you have enemies walking through them, you can pretty much just kill enemies without them ever even noticing you. And it's pretty strong. So yeah, thanks for checking this out, and I will see you in another Prey video.